I mean home. يا الله قول يا شيخ.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم الذي خلقكم والذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون الذي جعل لكم الأرض فراشا والسماء بناء وأنزل من السماء ماء فأخرج به من الثمرات رزقا لكم فلا تجعلوا لله أندادا وأنتم تعلمون وإن كنتم في ريب مما نزلنا على عبدنا فأتوا بسورة من مثله وادعوا شهداءكم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين فإن لم تفعلوا ولن تفعلوا فاتقوا النار التي وقودها الناس والحجارة أعدت للكافرين وبشر الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أن لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار كلما رزقوا منها من ثمرة رزقا قالوا هذا الذي رزقنا من قبل وأتوا به متشابها ولهم فيها أزواج مطهرة وهم فيها خالدون. الله سمع الله 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 الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين إن الله لا يستحيي أن يضرب مثلا ما بعوضة فما فوقها فأما الذين آمنوا فيعلمون أنه الحق من ربهم وأما الذين كفروا فيقولون ماذا أراد الله بهذا مثلا يضل به كثيرا ويهدي به كثيرا وما يضل به إلا الفاسقين الذين ينقضون عهد الله من بعد ميثاقه ويقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويفسدون في الأرض أولئك تكفرون بالله وكنتم أمواتا فأحياكم ثم يميتكم ثم يحييكم ثم إليه ترجعون هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا ثم استوى إلى السماء فسواهن 7 سماوات وهو بكل شيء عليم. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله 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 السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Last week we spoke about sleep and how sleep is important to any human being, and how many times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions and speaks about the blessing of sleep in the Quran, the fact that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam taught us about the manner and how we should sleep as well. And this is what we went over last week. This week, inshallah, we will speak about something that reminds us about rectifying and making our spiritual side of our lives stronger. And again, we look at the Quran and we find many reminders regarding this topic in the Quran as well. Today, inshallah, we'll speak about birds. Birds are mentioned in the Quran many times. After all, they are the air force of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's army. وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ تَرْمِيهِمْ بِحِجَارَةٍ مِّن سِجِّيلٍ. Salatul Fajr reminds us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used birds to eliminate the army of Abraha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks of birds. أَلَمْ يَرَوْا إِلَى الطَّيْرِ مُسَخَّرَاتٍ فِي جَوِّ السَّمَاءِ مَا يُمْسِكُهُنَّ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells us about special qualities of birds. The story of Sulaiman alayhi salam and how the bird Hudhud comes into play, and how that specific bird, anyone knows what the Hudhud is in English? Someone said it.
What's the question?
Hopeful. Hudhud, what kind of bird is that in English? Is that bird still around today?
Yeah, it is.
One of the characteristics or the qualities of that bird that it is able to locate water. And Sulaiman alayhi salam was using that bird to go ahead of the army of Sulaiman alayhi salam so that they can locate water. And of course, in the search for water, this Hudhud comes in discovery of another kingdom. And of course, we know the remainder of the story. So birds, why are we talking about birds today? Is it because that today the temperature is 0, and usually birds, they fly down south where it's warmer? Should we follow birds in that aspect? Or should we follow the simplicity of birds? We know that birds, they live a very simple life. They build a structure which is known as the nest. They nurture their young, and then they let the young fly away from the nest once they reach that capacity. Or are we talking about birds from an aspect of what Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam told us, that your hearts should be similar to the hearts of the birds? Our hearts should be similar to the hearts of birds. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that. Why? Because يَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ أَقْوَامٌ أَفْئِدَتُهُمْ مِثْلُ أَفْئِدَةِ الطَّيْرِ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام, that there will be an entire group of people on Yawm al-Qiyamah who will enter into Jannah just because their hearts were similar to the hearts of birds. So what is so special? Their level of tawakkul ala Allah. Birds, they have this beautiful lesson that we can all learn from, is that they leave their nest hungry in the morning. They rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by the evening they return back to their nest with full stomachs. So if we were to study this aspect, just this aspect, and there are hundreds, if not thousands of things that we can learn from the animal kingdom. There are entire books written on the animal kingdom. Hayatul Hayawan is one of those books. And as Muslims, we are encouraged to learn regarding the animal kingdom, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses so many examples in the Quran of animals. Just this morning we read about in Salatul Fajr, we read about the mosquito. إن الله لا يستحي أن يضرب مثلا ما بعوضة فما فوقها. We learn of a fly, the similitude of a fly in the Quran. We learn about elephants in the Quran. We learn about an entire chapter just on spiders, Suratul Ankabut. And there are many other examples in the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes the life of an animal and takes just one aspect of it. Look at the ants. The ants in the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam, that is the most comprehensive statement in the entire Quran. What the ant, the queen was telling her colony. Anyone knows that ayah? خُلُوا مَسَاكِنَكُمْ. Subhanallah, if we just study that sentence, there are so many, the structure of that sentence is a comprehensive, if we ever wanted to appreciate the Arabic language. In the sentence of the queen ant. So going back today regarding the life of birds and how birds, they demonstrate an exemplary lesson for us in the subject of tawakkul. Tawakkul, we know that this is a beautiful quality for all of us to strive for. And how our lives are set up today, it creates a buffer zone. It creates an extremely comfort zone for us that we are unable to appreciate the level of tawakkul. For example, if anyone worked instead of a career, instead of the 9 to 5, if we lived like people who have what is known as the gig economy. The gig economy are people who, when they go to sleep at night, they don't know what their job is the next day. They don't know if it's a 9 to 5. Gig economy workers literally have no idea, what am I doing tomorrow? How long will I be working? How much money will I be making? We are in a very comfort zone, and there is nothing wrong with that. It's just the generation that we are living in. This is one of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in comparison to the hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of blessings upon us. This is one blessing, that the concept of 9 to 5 and how we are very comfortable either on a weekly paycheck or a bi-weekly paycheck or a monthly paycheck. Tawakkul ala Allah is something, if we were to go back a few generations, we will see that people had extremely difficult lives. They did not know where their next paycheck was coming from. And imagine they had families and children and a wife at home to support. So today's subject will at least give us a glimpse into that aspect of life, is that the bird, they leave the nest hungry in the morning, and by the time they reach back to their nest in the evening, they have full stomachs. وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلَ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُتَوَكِّلِينَ. These are some of the verses in the Quran that gives us an appreciation of this subject of tawakkul, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if any of us simply depended on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sufficient for us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who rely on Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just some backgrounds into this word of tawakkul. If we just break it down, we will find another phenomenon that all of us are familiar with, and that is the concept of a wakeel. Wakil, in most of the cultures that we are belonging to, wakil usually comes into play when talks of marriage is being discussed, right? Usually the bride appoints her father or a fatherly figure in her family if her father is absent. The fatherly figure, or her father, or her uncle from her father's side, or her brother, or these male figures in her life are appointed as a wakil to represent her. Now, what type of a wakil should be chosen? Is it just any Joe Schmo? Or is there a certain requirement and certain criteria for who should be appointed as a wakil? Number one, the wakil should be an individual who is knowledgeable of the subject matter. And we'll just stick to marriage. The father usually is knowledgeable regarding his daughter's wedding that is soon to be. So the father is knowledgeable. Or even in the aspect of another category, for example, another meaning of wakil would be a representative. It could be someone who speaks in the courts on behalf of the client, in other words, a lawyer. So are these people knowledgeable of the subject matter is the first criteria we should look at when we are choosing a wakil. The second requirement for a wakil is, does the person being chosen as a wakil have the capacity to discharge those responsibilities? When the demand is placed on that individual to discharge the responsibilities, does that person have the ability to discharge those responsibilities, or will they become incapacitated? Meaning, will they freeze when the moment of demand is placed on them? There are many people who will freeze, and imagine freezing in court before the judge. Now it's your turn to say your side of the story or make your case. Do you freeze in front of the judge? Or do you freeze when the imam is asking that, do you give the hand of such and such bride to this groom? Now the person freezes. Imagine that situation. So number two requirement for a wakil is, do they have the ability to discharge the trust, the amana that has been entrusted on him? And number three is that, does the wakil who has been appointed, do they have the best interest at heart for the person that appointed them as a wakil? So in the case of a bride, the wakil who is being appointed, did that wakil have the best interest at heart for the bride? Meaning, did they go through the background check of the groom? Does that groom meet the list of items? Are they a religious person? Do they have the amount of wealth to sustain a family, to protect, give them shelter? Did they go through these check items of the groom on behalf of the bride? So these three are the criteria for when choosing a wakil. And why are we talking about a wakil? Is because we are talking about birds and their level of tawakkul, dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it will give us an appreciation that when we look at the fact that you and I have made Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala our representative, we have made Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala our everything, that we rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, we have this confirmation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meets and exceeds all those three criteria. Number one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is absolutely knowledgeable of every single subject in existence and beyond. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is knowledgeable of every single subject and beyond. Number two is, of course, we are 1000% confident that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to discharge when the time arises, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to fulfill that responsibility. And finally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the one who we rely on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the best interest for you and I. So when we look at this aspect of a wakil, we can connect it to our everyday examples. And we can appreciate the fact that this is the concept that you and I are constantly reminded about day in and day out in lectures throughout the year, in lectures such as today after Salatul Fajr. We are reminded of tawakkul on a weekly basis, maybe in the form of a Jum'ah khutbah, or we are reminded of tawakkul when we come out into the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are reminded of this concept, and we are always encouraged of placing our reliance and tawakkul and dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And after all, it is the sunnah of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to practice this concept. And making our own preparation and our own effort, it does not go against the concept of tawakkul. If we look at what Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam did on the day of Uhud, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, of course, who can depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better than our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam? Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam did not go out into the battlefield saying that I depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But rather, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam was a very special case in the battle of Uhud. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam put on his body two levels of security, two steel armors. That's what Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam did in preparation. That of course he used his intelligence, he used his capacity, what he has in his ownership. And of course, he sallallahu alayhi wasallam practiced dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the famous saying that we always hear is that tie your camel and depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a very, very famous saying. So in conclusion, we will conclude with the sunnah of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam and the subject matter of tawakkul, that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam regularly practiced the dua, and we should all learn this dua, that Allahumma hadha al-juhd, Allahumma hadha al-juhd, wa alayka tuklan. That, oh Allah, this is my effort. And in the beginning, in the middle, in the end, we rely on you. So let us learn this dua, not only learn it, but also apply it in our everyday lives. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allows us, all of us, you and I, to increase in our levels of tawakkul ala Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us that ability. Wa akhir da'wana, alhamdulillah.